Hello. Well, let's see how this goes. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share this. Share. There we go. All right, so let me make sure real quickly that my sound is on. I don't want to mess this up. Oh, come on. Share my screen. Let me make sure my sound is on. Yes, that camera's on. My sound is on. Microphone array tech. It seems like you can hear me. I think this is okay. All right. So we'll go back to share screen. We'll see how this goes. And ta-da. All right, so we're going to go over kin selection and multi-level selection today in class, and generally what those are and how you measure them and what their predictions are and things like that. All right, so kin selection is the idea that in addition to you replicating versions of your genes, relatives that share descent with you will have some proportion of your genome in common with their own. So to properly calculate the amount of genetic material that you're transmitting into the next generation, you have to account for one, your direct reproductive output, and then two, your indirect reproductive output, i.e. the number of genetic copies you produce of your own genes via assisting kin relatives. So this turns out to be rather important because one, it's an important feature to properly account for the reproductive output of any individual. You have to include both direct and indirect reproductive output to calculate their fitness contribution to the next generation. And two, it helps to explain really weird phenomena like sterile individuals that don't ever reproduce because they can still achieve significant amounts of fitness by assisting their relatives in reproducing. And so this produces this little inequality here, this Hamilton's rule, that is that a trait is predicted to evolve under the following circumstances. If the product, i.e. the when you multiply relatedness, R, times the benefit to the recipient is greater than the cost to the donor, then the trait should spread. So generally speaking, say I'm the individual engaging in the altruistic act and I'm proliferating and you're the recipient. So it decreases my fitness by, let's say, some unit like 3. I'm going to have 3 fewer offspring. Or, I mean, the fitness could also be a proxy. Like, I have 3 calories fewer because I groomed you for a second. But whatever the metric is, it's some proxy of fitness. It could also be a survival probability. If, however, whatever I've done in terms of this action is beneficial to you, beneficial enough to you that when I multiply it by our relatedness coefficient, it exceeds the cost to me, then I should exhibit this trait. So if you're very closely related to me, if that R is, say you're a sibling, you share 50% of your genome in common, or you're a parent or one of my offspring, on average you'll share 50% of your genome in common, then it has to be twice as beneficial for you than it was costly for me in order to spread in the population. Make sense? But if your relatedness is low, then it means the benefit must be huge. If the benefit is small, then your relatedness must be large in order to get this inequality to work, or the costs have to be trivial for me. You know, me picking a nit out of your hair and eating it, well, it's hard to know how costly that is, but it's probably not that costly. And then it might actually be beneficial depending on the caloric intake of that nit. But whatever. Anyway, so you get the general gist. If the product of the relatedness and the benefit to the recipients, because it can be multiple, is greater than the cost to me in terms of whatever fitness proxy we have, you will see this trait spread to the population. It will increase in frequency and severity. Now, imagine trying to estimate this in the real world. How do you test Hamilton's rule? Well, relatedness, R, is very easy to estimate because we have tons of molecular tools to do it. It used to be that we used polymorphic enzymes called allozymes to try to differentiate between relatives and non-relatives, and that was pretty bad. And before the 80s, we basically just had to guess who was related to who. Paternity tests didn't exist. And so But now, in the 90s, we had microsats, then we had RFLPs in the 2000s, and now we have incredibly high frequency SNPs to be able to finally differentiate and estimate the relatedness between individuals. So R is easy. So modern population genetics, we can assess relatedness between individuals, ta-da, relative to ambient relatedness in the population. How do I calculate the benefit to you? So, all right, let's put in this knit example. I reach out, I grab one of those knits out of your hair, and then I eat it. All right, how do I estimate how much that benefits your fitness or your frequency of a disease? I don't have alternative universes where I didn't pick out a knit, and then in another alternative universe where I picked out 2 knits, and then I can see the per knit increase to your fitness by my act. So what do? Do I try to correlate it with something? All right, all of the individuals in the population that get knits picked out all the time have higher reproductive outputs. Hooray, right? Is that a good estimate? Well, maybe, but maybe it isn't. So what if all the individuals that are being groomed are also high ranking? Well, is there increase in fitness because of the number of knits that are being pulled out of their hair, or the fact that they're the charmed individuals in our social group? Shoot. Or what's the cost? How do I estimate the cost for me reaching out and picking out one knit? The calories? My time? If I could have been eating if I wasn't doing this. I'm not picking off the knits from my offspring instead. What do you compare it to estimate this cost of this one act? Or even multiple acts. Say that you're going to be less specific than that. Spending an hour picking out knits. Presumably then the effect will be larger, but you still don't have anything to compare it to, really. A world where I didn't pick out your knits, a world where I spent my time picking the knits out of my offspring, or going and getting food, or fighting my own infections, or growing larger, whatever, right? It's very hard to do. So add to that there's not just one recipient under normal conditions. Normally it's not an individual picking out of knits out of one other individual's head, but it's something more like, I put out an alarm call when I see a predator nearby. And the cost to me is that now I'm really obvious to that predator. The jig is up. It knows where I'm at. It might attack me. But then it's going to have a survival benefit for all the other members in my little tamarin group. Pretend I'm a tamarin or a marmoset or one of those cute cat monkey type creatures from South America. Well, how do I calculate the benefit to you guys? Create a world where I didn't call an alarm based on that predator, and then we see what the chances are in different simulated worlds of you guys being picked off by this. I'm not going to say a Fusa because that's from Madagascar, but like maybe some ocelot or felid predator in a tree. That's odds of getting you guys. And then I have to do that for each of you, right? And that turns out to be important because this inequality over here seems to think that there's only one relatedness and one benefit. But the reality is that there's going to be many of you, right? So if there's a small benefit and a small relatedness, but there's a whole bunch of recipients, then those values can be very small and the costly trait for me can still spread. But how do you estimate that for every single individual in our group, and presumably the benefits won't be the same based on who's near me and who's far away, and all of those things will influence whether or not I call at all. It's no shocker that although this little inequality makes a lot of sense, estimating it in real life and seeing whether or not it holds true is very challenging. So it's rarely tested, and then when we do test it, it turns out it usually doesn't add up all that well, and we assume it's not because it's wrong, but because we're just really bad at estimating B's and C's in real life situations. All right, so what are the predictions from kin selection? Well, we suppose that social groups will tend to be composed of related individuals, right? And that individuals will tend to help relatives more than non-relatives because they share their components of their genome in common. And so it's more beneficial to me to be altruistic towards relatives over non-relatives, my offspring versus your offspring, my cousins or parents, great more so than some unrelated individuals. And our social group should tend to focus in on that to make sure we're getting all the possible indirect benefits that we can through these inclusive fitness metrics. All right, so let's look at these little white-fronted bee eaters here. We have the coefficient of relatedness on the x-axis here. So we have unrelated individuals, cousins, half-sibs, full sibs. And that's the proportion of their genome they share in common, the proportion of their polymorphic genome. These things have a lot of their genome shared in common, but of the genome that exhibits some variability, this is the proportion of that short portion of the genome that they share in common. So we don't have a lot of variation in our genome that determines the development of our heart, but there are polymorphic components of our genome that vary between individuals, and that's the component of the genome that we're actually looking at here. The variable component of their genome, they share this proportion in common. So unrelated, cousins, half-sibs, i.e. same mom, different dad, and then, or vice versa, and full sibs. Probability of helping? No, no surprise. These white-fronted bee eaters are more likely to assist kin, and that makes sense because that increases R, which means that their inclusive fitness benefits are enhanced. Predictions 1 and 2, that individuals will help relatives more than non-relatives, that social groups will be composed of related individuals. Those have alternative explanations. So they're not really great, sturdy, specific predictions that show kin selection is happening. They just sort of are consistent with the hypothesis. So for instance, imagine that I'm just more likely to help individuals that I'm familiar with because yesterday you helped me, I help you, and so this is positive feedback loop that we have a standing social relationship with each other. Just by chance in a population, the individuals around you are going to tend to be closer related to you than you expect by chance because, you just have some dispersal distance from your natal group. It's probably not all that far, and you probably have an increased likelihood that you're going to rejoin a social group that other members of your family have dispersed into, even if it's not your natal social group. It's just the adjoining group. You're more likely to join groups nearby than far away. So by chance, you're going to tend to be in groups that are more closely related to you than groups that are very far away. So just the viscosity and short dispersal distances of individuals will create neighborhoods of groups that tend to be more closely related than random individuals across large spaces. So is it relatedness that's driving this enhanced altruistic tendency between individuals, or is it familiarity? Is it because you've known that individual your whole life? Is it because you have experience with them in the past? It's hard to say. They both are correlated together. The familiar individuals are also your relatives, and the individuals you have stable relationships with are also your relatives. But which one of those two things is it, or is it something entirely different that's the actual driver of your altruistic act? Hard to know. But kin selection makes such intuitive sense that oftentimes we take relatively weak calibers of evidence to substantiate it and then move on. Now, the third prediction, experimentally decreasing relatedness should end altruism, that's actually a much finer test. Enter slime molds. Dictyostela. Dictyostela are little proto-animal slime molds that spend most of their lives as a mobile little amoeba plasmodium, basically moving around in the soil, eating bacteria. Now, eventually, some individuals will descend upon that environment or move into an environment where prey bacteria become rare, and these little amoebae that are wandering around in the environment run out of food. So what do? They begin to cooperate. How do they do that? They send out a little signal, chemical signal into the soil that we're running out of food. Then all the amoebae in that neighborhood all come together and make a little slug that is like a multicellular, highly mobile subway that they take around in the soil trying to find additional bacteria. So maybe the bacteria aren't here to eat, but if we can all work together as amoebae, we can beeline around and trying to find areas that have more bacteria, and that's good. We can go further, and presumably we'll be able to find some food. If the slug can't find all that much bacteria to consume either, it will create a fruiting body. So a stalk that extends out of the soil with a sporangium on top, where individuals will undergo meiosis, and disperse, like as little spores. They'll be able to reproduce. And this is important because we've run out of food. We can't find it in our slug highly mobile engine either under that circumstance. So we need to get away from this place. It is fallow. So we create this stalk, a subset of us undergo meiosis, and we disperse away. 75% of us that made that slug are going to get into that stalk and we're into that sporangium, and then we're going to float away, and our descendants will show up in some new place that presumably will have more food than the land that we destroyed. Now, what about that stalk? That stalk that we all sort of stood atop in order to disperse away, or undergo meiosis and then disperse away, that stalk doesn't reproduce, it dies. And 25% of the individuals that made that slug, they're stuck in that stalk. They don't get away. They are killing themselves so that the rest of us can get away. Why does that happen? Why would 25% of us willingly gamble, or why would any of us gamble the 25% chance of perishing? Well, if we don't create this stalk, undergo meiosis, and disperse away, we could all die. So maybe a 75% chance is better than a 0% chance, but then it also could be that we're closely related. And guess what? These Dictyostela are very closely related in these neighborhoods. Even when they're little amoebae wandering around in the soil before they make that slug, they tend to be very closely related. So that slug is composed of highly related individuals, and so the stalk and the sporangia are composed of highly related individuals. So even if you get screwed over into being in the stalk, it's not that big of a deal because your relatives are up in that sporangium, they're going to undergo meiosis, and they're going to get away. And that's almost as good as you getting away because you're very nearly clones. Relatedness coefficients are above 0.85, which is much higher related than just regular siblings. So you get the drift. Anyway, so Joan Strassman and David Queller did an experiment where they took experimental populations of these Dictyostela, and they created artificial neighborhoods. In some of those neighborhoods, they seeded them with related individuals and had them undergo experimental evolution where they were constantly around related individuals. In another experiment, a set of treatment groups, they took individuals that were completely unrelated and put them in these petri dishes together and had them evolve under many generations under experimental evolution. So 2 treatment groups, evolving as relatives, evolving as non-relatives. Guess what happened in the non-relative treatments? A mutant evolved, i.e. a mutant that would not show up in the stalk. So a genetic mutation that allowed some variants, some types of individuals in unrelated neighborhoods to make sure they don't end up in that stalk. And of course that would be beneficial, right? Why would somebody want to gamble being in a stalk, having a 1 in 4 chance never reproducing? That's for suckers. So have a MACA mutation that allows you to cheat the odds. Everyone else can gamble, but you, cheater mutant, you get into the stalk every single time. Great for you, right? Your cheating phenotype will spread over many generations, little experimental generations in laboratory, thwarting the status quo and watching these poor, formerly related, I guess they were never related individuals, forego their odds of being in the stalk until eventually we're always in the stalk, or we're always in the sporangium. Everyone else is in the stalk. So we have total dominance through time. Seems great, right? Good for us. Problem, as you keep doing this, guess what happens? Those experimental populations become dominated by the cheating strategy that won't produce the stalk, that won't get in there to create this dispersal mechanism, this tower for us to get away. So what happens in the end? We lose the ability to create the stalk. We're so dominated by this cheater mutant in these experimental populations that no stalk is created, we never get away, and so we lose this ability to disperse from fallow environments, a major cost. And this is a very nice experiment because it experimentally isolates relatedness in neighborhoods, and it observes the evolution of a cheating phenotype that biases its chances to stay out of that stalk, and then it proliferates through a population, and then it causes the demise of this multicellular cooperation that creates this fruiting body. So this is a cause-effect relationship, much better than that bee-eating thing or whatever, which is merely correlative from the previous slide. So let's go over multi-level selection now. I really hope this sound is going because my throat, I got a sore throat, it's early in the morning. Blah, 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 I'm gonna whine. I'm gonna have more water, I'm sorry. All right, multi-level selection, somewhat less familiar to most of you, but it makes intuitive sense, although you've been taught against it your whole lives. All right, so multi-level selection basically says that the fate of your group, how you do in aggregate, might be important for determining social evolution. So a major determinant of how well you reproduce is how well your group is doing. Basically, the metaphor is you're all stuck on a ship together. In this case, a fancy flower ship from Vladimir Kush, who's a surrealist painter. Anyway, so we're all stuck on this flower ship together. And the idea is that some of us might benefit from cheating each other in this group, right? I swindle you out of resources. You swindle me. We fight for access to the dominant position on this ship together, on our social group, metaphoric ship together. The problem is, though, is if this ship sinks because of us swindling each other out of modicums of power, well, we're all going down. And so there's this tension in multi-level selection. We have basically two kinds of tug of wars. Within our social group, these circles here, we're fighting each other over resources to be the dominant individual. However, this tug of war within the group has to be paired against the tug of war between groups, competition between groups. And if we fight too hard within our groups, this could thwart our ability for our group to perform. Other colonies of insects or social groups might maraud us or consume us or steal our offspring or steal our foraging rights or whatever, right? They'll sink our ship. And so you have two ways you can spend your energy: jockeying for the dominant position in your group, or ensuring that your group outperforms other groups. And this tension is what causes multi-level selection. You do things for the good of the ship, because if you don't help the ship, you're screwed together. The ship goes down, everyone dies. All right. This has a lot of criticisms. So first off, groups, typically there are fewer groups. There are many individuals, there are fewer groups. Individuals might live a single generation, a year, 3 years, 3 months, 10 years, whatever, but social groups last a long, long time. So individuals are dying all the time, they're reproducing all the time. Social groups are slowly growing, they rarely go extinct, they might not be all that stable to begin with. They might be like very fluid. Individuals enter and leave groups. Living a long time, having a small effective population size by having only a few groups means that group level selection will tend to be less efficient than individual level selection, which has many more individuals that are reproducing all the time. So they're having more generations happening all the time. It's going to be a more efficient unit of selection. All the genes inside of an individual are stuck together on a ship. The ship metaphor doesn't work all that well if there are ropes going between all the ships so individuals can just leave social groups after they've screwed it over, right? So if you can cheat in your social group, swindle each other out of modicums of power, cause the sinking of the ship, but then you can just get away after you've ruined that social group, then group selection doesn't really matter because you can just ruin the group and get away. So group level selection is always susceptible to cheating and individuals getting away if they can. If you're really stuck on the ship, there's no getting away. What are you going to go to sea, drown? But if you can get away, you can swindle one social group and go to another one freely, then group level selection is ineffective. So the ship metaphor doesn't work. Cheaters are favored. And for most organisms that don't live together highly in social groups, that are highly integrated, that are well-integrated ships, that are finite, that have direct competitive environments with other ships, and where the performance of that social group is a major indicator of an individual's fitness, if you don't have those phenomena, if those features aren't met, group selection is unimportant usually. Let's imagine a forest. Look at this forest in the bottom right-hand corner here. Forests are weird. Trunks. Why do plants have trunks? Trunks basically help plants get higher up above other plants, send out their leaves, and get sunlight. Trunks aren't photosynthetic. They don't help plants get more water from deeper into the soil. They're just a competitive strategy to help plants get higher up into the canopy and shade out their competition. if plants were evolving traits for the good of the species, for the good of the community of plants nearby, there would be no trunks, right? Because they wouldn't be competing with each other. Plants would just send out their plants, Jesus, their leaves, collecting light. They would have roots in the ground, and then no one would need to produce a trunk because nobody would be competing with each other. They would all be doing what maximizes the performance, i.e. the photosynthesis rate of the entire forest. So we would have a trunkless forest mat along the ground. No forests of friendships exist in the world. Here's an example of multi-level selection in water striders. So water striders have males that basically spend almost their whole lives in copulating. So really aggressive males gain access to lots of females. So if there's a pool of males competing for access to females, dominant males are able to secure more access to females, and they chase off rival males. However, neighborhoods that have many aggressive males in them scare all of the females off of the water column. And so they're basically all, they're basically a water surface. And so basically they're all sterilized. So here's a great example of multi-level selection. It pays for an individual to be highly aggressive. It's costly for the group to have a group that's composed of many aggressive males. So the tension goes that groups that are not aggressive reproduce more, but dominant individuals that are very aggressive tend to reproduce more. So there's a tension. And as that aggressive strategy proliferates, the whole group does worse and worse. And that's the multi-level selection versus kin selection example for today in class. And we'll do the next modeling component for Wednesday. Take it easy. Oh, wait, it's not actually done yet. All right, never mind. Now it's done.